Stay close to me. No! I've got you! Hold on, please.
Lee Seo-jun was laughing. Quietly, the way he always did, head tilted down toward his wife, one hand at the small of her back as they moved through the rear corridor of the venue. Tiffany had said something sharp and dry about the French ambassador's hairpiece, and Seo-jun had laughed, and she had looked up at him with that expression she reserved only for moments like this, satisfied, warm, privately delighted that she could still catch him off guard after 4 years of marriage. The motorcade was waiting outside. 3 black vehicles, engines running low, exhaust curling white in the cool night air. The city stretched out beyond the roofline, Seoul glittering and indifferent, the way cities always are just before something breaks. Her lead security agent moved ahead and opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Tiffany was mid-sentence. Her right hand reached for the door frame. Her head was turned slightly toward Seo-jun, still talking, and he was listening the way he always listened to her completely, like nothing else in the world was producing sound. The shot came from above and to the left. A single crack, clean, and then the night just stopped. Tiffany's body didn't fall the way bodies fall in films. There was no slow motion, no graceful collapse. She dropped, hard and sudden, the way a person drops when the signals between brain and legs simply cease, and Seo-jun caught her before any conscious thought told him to move. One arm around her torso, one hand going immediately to her side where the blood was already coming dark through the fabric, and he was on his knees on the pavement with her in his arms before the security team had even fully processed what had happened. The next 4 seconds were chaos, shouting, radios erupting all at once. 2 agents collapsed around the vehicles, one sprinted toward the adjacent building. Someone was screaming in Korean for a medical team, the words running together, and somewhere in the middle distance a second vehicle's door slammed hard. Seo-jun heard none of it. He was looking at her face. Her eyes were open. That was the thing that would stay with him long after everything else faded, not the blood, not the sound of the shot, not the city humming its indifferent hum above them. Her eyes were open and clear, and she was looking directly at him, and her mouth moved. Don't let them see you break. Her voice was quiet, almost steady, like she was giving him a briefing. He pulled her closer, not gently, desperately, and pressed his hand harder against her side, and his face did something that the agents closest to him had never seen it do in 4 years of service. Something fractured behind his eyes, something that had no name in the vocabulary of a man like Lee Seo-jun, because he had spent 41 years ensuring it never needed one. He said her name, once in Korean, low and cracked, barely above a whisper. The sirens began. Before we go any further, if this story is already getting under your skin, the comments need to hear your thoughts. Like, subscribe, and tell me what's going through your mind right now, because after what just happened, I already know the comment section is about to be divided. I'll be reading every single one. Rewind 14 hours. Tiffany was at her desk at 7 in the morning, already on her second cup of coffee, reading through a 40-page contract with a red pen and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had a call with her London legal team in 20 minutes, a dress fitting for the gala at 10. 3 emails flagged urgent that she had not yet decided were actually urgent. Seo-jun came into the room in a gray shirt, no jacket, moving with the loose, unhurried ease he only had inside their home. He set a plate of food on the corner of her desk without comment and sat in the chair across from her and picked up the section of the contract she'd already reviewed and started reading it himself. She didn't look up. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. This was their morning, not performed, not narrated for anyone, just 2 people sharing a problem and a room. At some point, Tiffany set her pen down and said, "The indemnity clause is going to be a problem." "It was already a problem," Seo-jun said. "They're hoping you won't notice." She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "How long have you known?" 3 days. She held his gaze for a beat, then picked the pen back up. "Next time, just tell me." "No," he said simply, and went back to reading. She didn't smile, but her jaw shifted that almost imperceptible thing it did when she was fighting one. 4 years and he could still do that. It still bothered her that he could. By 9, she was on the phone with London. By 10, she was at the fitting. By noon, she had resolved all 3 urgent emails and generated 2 new ones. She moved through her day the way she moved through everything, without performance, without wasted motion, with the particular efficiency of a woman who had been running at full capacity for so long, it had simply become her resting state. She confirmed the evening's departure plan with her security lead at 4 o'clock. Direct exit from the venue's rear at approximately 10:45. No hotel stop, straight home. She had an early London call in the morning and no interest in a longer night than necessary. Her lead security agent, a man named Jun Ki, 2 years on her detail, trusted, nodded once, and said he'd coordinate with the motorcade team. He went to his car afterward and sat without moving for 3 full minutes, stared at the steering wheel, then took out a second phone from the inside pocket of his jacket, a different phone, a phone that no one on the team knew existed, and typed an encrypted message to a number saved under a false name. Direct departure, rear private exit, approximately 22:45. He sent it, put the phone away, sat for another moment, then started the engine. He had been doing this for 3 months, feeding small pieces, calibrated pieces, nothing dramatic enough to trigger suspicion. The people paying him had been patient and precise and generous. They had told him this was the final message, that after tonight, he would be done. He believed them because he needed to. If you're already feeling the weight of this good, drop it in the comments. Like and subscribe so you're here when this story turns. And trust me, it turns. 6 months before that night, Vanessa Cole had been sitting 3 tables away from Lee Seo-jun at a technology philanthropy summit in Singapore and had made a decision that she didn't fully understand yet. She saw him across the room, not his wealth, not his reputation. Those were things she'd researched in advance. She saw him watching his wife. The specific quality of it, the way a man who was clearly accustomed to reading every room, controlling every dynamic, accounting for every variable, the way that man looked at one woman and simply stopped calculating. And then she saw Tiffany, the way she held a room without appearing to try, the way she answered a question at the table, and 3 people reflexively leaned in. The way she tilted her head when she found something amusing and didn't quite smile. Vanessa watched all of it for 40 minutes and felt something calcify in her chest. That should be her life, not in the abstract way of envy. In the specific, certain, irrational way of a woman who had spent her entire life acquiring things that impressed other people and had never once felt this particular hunger before. It wasn't about Seo-jun exactly. It wasn't about money. It was about that. What Tiffany had. The gravity of it, the completeness. She flew home from Singapore and spent 2 weeks thinking. Then she started working. She was methodical in a way that made her dangerous. She didn't try to force her way into the Lee world. She mapped its edges, the charity boards, the arts foundations, the philanthropic circles where the inner rings, outer rings spent their visible time. She joined 3 of them over 4 months. She showed up consistently. She was warm without being eager. She remembered details about people. She made herself useful in the quiet way that eventually makes someone indispensable. She studied Tiffany the way you study a subject you intend to replace. Her wardrobe, her speech patterns, her cadence in professional rooms versus social ones. She wasn't mimicking her, she was learning the frequency, understanding what made Tiffany Sinclair the fixed point around which everything else orbited. She engineered 3 encounters over 6 weeks, each one brief, natural, unforced. She was never too present, never memorable in the wrong direction. Just a face that registered as friendly, competent, harmless. Meanwhile, someone found her. She still wasn't entirely sure how. A message through a private channel referencing things about her that she hadn't shared publicly. A meeting in a hotel bar in Seoul, a man she didn't know, representing people he didn't name. They knew about her obsession with the Lee world. They framed it carefully, not as obsession but as ambition, as alignment. They had interests that overlapped with hers, they said. They could help her get close. In exchange, they needed occasional information, nothing dramatic, just proximity, access. The kind of intelligence that only someone inside a circle can provide. She said yes. She told herself it was practical. She didn't ask enough questions about who they were, She didn't want the answers to complicate what she'd already decided she was going to do. Inside the Lee Empire, something else was already in motion. Seo-jun had a cousin, a man named Dae-young, quiet and pleasant at family gatherings, polished in the way of someone who had spent years making himself acceptable to a world that owed him nothing. He had watched his cousin build an empire that was supposed to be a family empire. He had watched resources and influence accumulate around Seo-jun specifically, then consolidate further when Seo-jun married a woman who had no bloodline claim to any of it. Dae-young had smiled at every dinner, had welcomed Tiffany warmly and specifically, had given a warm toast at their anniversary and meant none of it. He was the gap Vanessa Cole walked through. He made the introduction, brought her to an event, vouched for her presence in a room that would otherwise have filtered her out. He told himself it was harmless, that he was simply helping someone find their footing in the circle. He didn't examine that belief closely. And deeper inside the house, something older and more patient was watching all of it unfold. A woman who had been close to Seo-jun long before Tiffany existed in his world, who had moved through that household with the ease of someone who had earned her place through years of proximity and loyalty and presence, who had built, slowly and privately, a version of a future that depended on Tiffany Sinclair not being permanent. She had identified Vanessa Cole the same week Dae-young made the introduction. She had seen the obsession from across a room and recognized it the way you recognize a tool you've been looking for. She made contact separately, carefully. She gave Vanessa things that no outside operative could have provided: the internal schedule, the security rotation patterns, the specific geography of Tiffany's movements on event nights. She framed it as solidarity, as mutual interest, as the kind of help one woman extends to another when the thing standing between them is the same obstacle. She sat at Tiffany's table 3 days later and asked how her week had been. The night before the gala, Tiffany and Seo-jun were home, not doing anything significant. She was reading on the long sofa in the main room, actual reading, not documents, a novel she'd been working through for 6 weeks. He was at the far end of the same sofa with his own work, the room quiet between them in the specific way of two people who have learned to share silence without filling it. At some point, he looked up and watched her for a moment. She didn't notice or pretended not to. He went back to his work. Later, in the kitchen, he poured 2 glasses of water and set one beside her without interrupting the page she was on. She picked it up without looking away from the book. "You're going to make me tell you about the Tokyo meeting," he said. "I already know about the Tokyo meeting," she said. He looked at her. She turned a page. "You have a problem with the asset allocation, and you don't want to deal with it this week because of the gala, and you were hoping to table it until Monday." He was quiet for a moment. And we can table it until Monday." She finally looked up. "But you're going to stop thinking about it tonight. It's handled." He looked at her for a beat. Something moved across his face, not quite gratitude, something closer to recognition. The specific look of a man who still, 4 years in, occasionally found himself surprised by her. "Okay," he said. She went back to her book. They went to bed late and slept easily, the way people sleep when they trust the person next to them completely, when the weight of the day has been distributed between 2 sets of shoulders and neither set is carrying it alone. In a building across the city, Vanessa Cole was not sleeping. She was sitting at her window with the lights off, looking at nothing, running the sequence in her mind for the 9th time. The position, the window, the timing, the exit, the information had been precise. Too precise for someone who had worked this long to do anything but trust it. She told herself she wasn't going to hurt anyone permanently. She told herself this was just a removal, a redirection, that everything would unfold differently afterward, better, the way it was supposed to be. She told herself a lot of things that night. By morning, she had stopped talking herself through it and was simply waiting for the hours to pass. You already know what's coming and you still can't stop. That's this story. Like and subscribe and tell me in the comments what Tiffany would have done if she'd known that night. I genuinely want to know. The gala was exactly what these events always were, money performing itself in a room full of people who understood the performance and chose to participate because the alternative was irrelevant. Tiffany moved through it the way she moved through everything. She worked the room with the specific ease of someone who had stopped needing it to validate her so long ago that the ease had become genuine. She remembered 47 names. She redirected 3 conversations, going sideways without either party realizing she'd intervened. She gave a 6-minute address that got a standing ovation and looked quietly embarrassed by it, which made people like her more than the speech had. She spoke to a women's education director from Nairobi for 20 minutes and gave the woman her personal email before moving on. She spotted a board member positioned awkwardly away from the room's main current and deliberately brought the current to him. She did all of this while tracking the room's dynamics in the background of her attention, the way certain people track everything, not anxiously, just constantly. Seo-jun watched her from across the room, not the way husbands watch wives at events possessively or out of obligation, or the vague social awareness of knowing where your person is in a space. He watched her the way he'd watched her since the beginning, with the specific quality of attention that the 140 other people in that room would have given a great deal to receive from him and would never. He was not a man who gave his full attention easily. With her, it was simply automatic. It had always been automatic. At 10:04, she caught his eye from across the room. Nothing passed between them except a look, 2 seconds, direct, private. Then she turned back to the conversation she was in. He set his glass down. At 10:19, Vanessa Cole stood at the room's perimeter with a glass of champagne she had barely touched. She had been in this world for 8 months. She had been in this room for 2 hours. She had made exactly the right amount of conversation with exactly the right people and had consumed 1 drink over the entire evening because she needed her hands steady and her mind clear. She watched Tiffany work the room. She watched Seo-jun watch Tiffany. She watched the moment at the end of the evening when he materialized at Tiffany's side, not dramatically, just moved through the room and arrived there naturally, the way water finds its level, and the look that passed between them when he reached her. Brief, not performed for the room, worth more than anything else in it. Vanessa set her glass on a passing tray. She had 24 minutes. The rear corridor was quiet at 10:38. The venue's back staff moved efficiently around the Lee motorcade team, the 3 vehicles already in position, exhaust wisping in the cool air. Tiffany and Seo-jun moved through the corridor with 4 members of the detail, past the catering staging area, through the heavy side door and out into the night. She was talking. Something about the Nairobi director, something she wanted to follow up on, her mind already moving into tomorrow morning's logistics, the way her mind always moved forward, organized, several steps ahead of the moment. The security lead opened the door. Her hand reached for the frame. The shot came. The hospital corridor on the 7th floor became Seo-jun's entire world for 9 days. It was private. Security had cleared the wing within 40 minutes of their arrival. The space held his chair, a small table, a window that looked out on the east side of the city, 3 shifts of rotating agents at the corridor's 2 ends, a medical team that reported to him every 6 hours. His chief of staff arrived within the hour and stood at the far end of the corridor, took 1 look at him, and made the correct, quiet decision not to speak. Seo-jun was in the chair with his jacket off and his shirt still carrying the evidence of the pavement on its left side. The blood had dried dark and stiff, and he was sitting with his forearms on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he was looking at the floor between his feet. He was not visibly emotional. He was not performing composure either. He was simply reduced. The whole structure of him, the part that managed and calculated and moved through rooms like weather, all of it had gone somewhere else. And what remained was a man in a chair who needed his wife to be alive. His head of security arrived 20 minutes later, delivered the preliminary briefing in a low, controlled voice. Suspect apprehended on a rooftop 2 buildings north. Weapon recovered. Identity being processed. No confirmed co-conspirators yet, but the position indicated advanced intelligence. They were working backward through the access chain. Seo-jun listened without looking up. When the man finished, he said, "Who else?" Not a question, a statement of understanding. A woman like Tiffany Sinclair did not get shot by a single obsessive with a clean rooftop position and advanced knowledge of her departure schedule. He had understood that the moment the shot came from above, rather than the crowd planned, positioned, fed, "We're working on it." Seo-jun looked up. The look was not aggressive. It was something quieter and more permanent than aggression. Work faster. Then he went back to looking at his hands. He stayed in that corridor. He slept in 40-minute intervals in a private room adjacent and returned to the chair each time. He ate when his chief of staff placed food in front of him and removed it when he didn't. He took 3 calls in 9 days. His lead attorney, his head of security on day 4 when the financial tracing document came through, and a single 60-second call with his mother that he ended gently and did not return. On the 4th day, the tracing document landed on his phone. Preliminary only, the weapon purchase ran through 3 shell formations before disappearing into a network that required more time to fully untangle. He read it twice, forwarded it to 2 people with a single line of instruction, and placed the phone face down on the seat beside him. On the 7th day, the rival conglomerate released a public statement of condolences. Formal, warm, precisely worded. Seo-jun read it once, sitting in that corridor. Then he opened a message to his chief of staff and typed 2 words: "Start now." The people who received that instruction did not ask what it meant. They understood. They began. On the 9th day, a nurse came through the door first. Then, the primary physician. The physician made eye contact with Seo-jun and gave the nod, the specific one, the one that meant "come now," and Seo-jun stood from the chair and walked down the corridor and pushed through the door. Tiffany was awake. Not just conscious, awake. Eyes clear, sitting slightly up in the elevated bed, already facing the door when he came through it, like she had timed it, like she had been saving the moment for exactly him. He crossed the room and stood beside the bed and looked at her and said nothing. His face was not composed, not performing composure. Just his actual face in this actual moment, with 9 days of everything that had happened to it showing plainly. He hadn't let anyone see it. He let her see it. She looked back at him. Read all of it. Took in the weight of the 9 days the way she took in most things completely, without looking away. Then her eyes moved to his shirt. Clean now. Laundered at some point, he couldn't remember when. The corner of her mouth shifted in the particular way it moved when she was about to say something precise and dry. "You look terrible," she said. He exhaled. The sound of it was involuntary, a long, released thing, like pressure leaving a sealed room. He sat on the edge of the bed, carefully, the way you sit beside something you know is not fragile but cannot stop treating as if it is, and reached for her hand. She let him take it. Her fingers closed around his. Then she tilted her head back and looked at the ceiling for 2 or 3 seconds. In that small window, she gave herself something, allowed herself something that lived below language and had no name he could give it. Whatever it was, it passed. She brought her eyes back to him. "I need paper," she said, "and I need you to tell me everything they found at the scene." She's been awake for 90 seconds and she's already working. Comment section, is she incredible or is she terrifying? Like and subscribe. The investigation is about to begin and she is not playing. She ran it from the hospital bed for 4 days and from a secure private residence for the 12 that followed. The circle, her personal attorney, 2 members of her detail she had handpicked and trusted with evidence rather than instinct, and Seo-jun. No one else entered the room during working sessions. No one else received documents. The door stayed closed. She did not begin with Vanessa Cole. She began with the question that had been sitting at the back of her mind since the moment she hit the pavement. Not who pulled the trigger, but who unlocked the building. Because the position was too clean, the timing too specific, the rooftop access too prepared. Vanessa Cole was many things, but she had not built that position alone. Someone had handed her the architecture. Tiffany laid everything across a wide table. Personnel files, financial records, event access logs, security rotation schedules from the 6 weeks prior. She moved through them the way she moved through legal documents in difficult cases, not looking for the obvious, but reading for the shape of what was trying not to be found. An absence. A rhythm with one beat deliberately missing. She identified Junki on the 2nd day. Not through the financial records, though those came later and confirmed everything. She found him through a behavioral inconsistency she had logged 3 months ago and had filed under nothing because at the time it seemed minor. A micro-hesitation during a route change on a Tuesday afternoon in February. His body had moved a quarter second before the instruction came a tell so small that only someone trained in behavioral reading would even register it, let alone retain it. She pulled his financials through her attorney. The payment structure was careful, dispersed across 6 months, routed through enough shells to survive a standard audit. Tiffany was not a standard audit. She found the seam in the second shell and followed it backward to its origin and documented every step. She handed the file to her attorney without comment and kept going. The coalition took 3 days. She cross-referenced acquisition timelines, board meeting schedules, and the ownership structures of 3 shell companies registered in different jurisdictions before the picture became clear enough to hold. They had been circling the Lee Empire for 2 years. They needed a destabilization event, not financial, not legal, but personal. Something that would fracture Seo-jun's operational judgment and create a 90-day window. They had studied him. They had identified that his only real vulnerability was Tiffany. That his love for her was the single lever that existed on a man who had otherwise eliminated every pressure point from his life. They had not been wrong about the lever. They had been wrong about what it would produce. Tiffany sat with that for a moment. Then she wrote the coalition chair's name on a sheet of paper and slid it across the table to Seo-jun without speaking. He looked at it. All 3 or just him. All of them. He picked up his phone. The extended family took 1 afternoon. Tiffany had always noticed the specific texture of certain relatives, silence around her, the calibrated warmth that was 1 degree too calibrated, the way inheritance conversations rerouted when she entered rooms. She had followed it for years under tolerate and monitor. Now she pulled the file out and examined it with different eyes. The communication chain between Dae-young and the coalition intermediaries was not difficult to construct once she knew the shape of it. Then she reached the internal leak. She went still at the table for a while, not because she didn't know. She knew. She had known for 3 days. She was waiting for the documentation to reach the level of certainty that her mind had already arrived at through behavioral memory alone. Every dinner, every interaction in the margins of their domestic life, every moment this woman had been present in their home, proximate to Seo-jun, warm toward Tiffany with the specific quality of warmth that required effort to maintain. Tiffany knew what sustained effort looked like in a face. It was part of what she did. She said nothing to Seo-jun. She needed him to behave naturally around this woman for 17 more days. She needed the case airtight before anyone moved. She needed the woman inside the house to believe completely, without a crack, that she had not been found. She documented everything, reorganized the files, went back to the coalition structure, and kept working. 3 weeks into her recovery, she and Seo-jun were eating dinner in the private residence, real dinner, the 2 of them at the table. The window opened to the evening, and she told him what she had found, piece by piece. The agent, the coalition, the family, the internal architecture. All of it except the name she was still building the case around. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me what you need from me." "Patience," she said. He looked at her. 17 days, she said. He nodded once. He had learned, a long time ago, to trust her read on a room. He had never needed to apply that trust more than he needed to apply it right now. 17 days of sitting across from the person who almost had her killed. Comment section, could you do that? Like and subscribe. Because what happens next is what separates good revenge from something else entirely. Seo-jun moved the way his power had always moved, without announcement, without visible seams, in the specific register of a man for whom consequence is simply a resource. The coalition chair received a call from his largest institutional investor on a Tuesday. The investor was not emotional. He stated his withdrawal simply, offered no explanation, and ended the call in under 4 minutes. By Thursday, 2 others had followed. By the following Monday, a regulatory body in a jurisdiction the coalition had considered sealed had opened a formal inquiry into acquisition practices. The inquiry was detailed in a way that indicated preparation. It had been prepared thoroughly, in advance, by people who had been handed exactly the right documentation at exactly the right moment. The board communications between the coalition's intermediaries and the Lee family members arrived simultaneously at 3 separate legal desks in 3 separate cities. Each recipient understood within minutes that the documentation was complete, and that any challenge to it would produce additional documentation rather than resolution. None of them challenged it. DeYoung was informed of his restructured role through an attorney in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. His title remained, his access did not. He sat through the entire meeting without speaking, because there was nothing to say, and he understood that. The cousin who had smiled at Tiffany's table for 4 years left that meeting a ceremonial figure in an empire he no longer had any real hand in. The protection agent was handed to authorities with an evidence package so complete that his own attorney advised immediate cooperation. He cooperated immediately. He did not name the people who had built the case. He suspected. He said nothing about his suspicion. All of this produced almost no visible noise. That was the specific quality of Seo-jun's reach. It moved like geology. Slow, absolute, reshaping the terrain so gradually that you didn't realize the ground beneath you had changed until you looked for solid footing and found it wasn't there. While he moved outward, Tiffany moved inward. Vanessa Cole's world contracted the way a room contracts when someone who knows architecture begins removing walls. Not dramatically, not all at once. In the specific accumulation of small closings that become undeniable only in their aggregate. Her accounts were frozen through clean, documented legal action tied to the conspiracy funding. The freeze was challenged. The challenge generated additional documentation. The challenge was withdrawn. 3 of her closest professional allies received information accurate, sourced, unattributable about Vanessa's involvement in the attack. It arrived through channels they trusted, from people they had no reason to doubt, and it made the math of continued association impossible. They distanced themselves the way professionals distance themselves through unreturned messages, and quietly rerouted connections and the gradual disappearance of her name from rooms it had previously occupied. Her public positioning began to surface inconsistencies, not from attacks, from facts, placed at precisely calibrated moments in front of precisely calibrated audiences. A financial record here, a timeline discrepancy there, small things that, once visible, could not be unseen and could not be explained. Every door she had used beauty or intelligence or social capital to open closed, not violently. They simply were no longer open. She would reach for a handle and find the frame already flush, as if she had imagined it ever gave way. She understood what was happening. She knew who was responsible. She could not prove it, could not fight it, could not produce evidence of a campaign that left no fingerprints. Tiffany never contacted her, never acknowledged her publicly, never referenced her existence in any forum. She simply ensured that Vanessa Cole's world became smaller, and then smaller, and then smaller than that. And she made sure Vanessa knew it was her, not through words or contact or any direct signal, through the pattern itself, its precision, its patience, its total absence of rage, a signature written in the specific style of a woman who never needed to announce herself. Vanessa sat in her apartment in the 4th week and understood fully that she had aimed at the wrong woman, that she had been handed a target and told it was a person, and she had not looked closely enough to understand the difference. She picked up her phone. She called a journalist she had worked with before. Vanessa Cole released the confession on a Thursday afternoon in the journalist's private office, sitting in front of a camera, completely still. She sent the files first, all of them, the financial records, the communication logs, the chain of instructions she had received and followed across 8 months. She sent them through her attorney and waited until she received confirmation that the journalist had verified the key documents before she agreed to sit down. Then she talked for 2 hours. She named the coalition intermediaries with specificity. She described the meetings, the hotel in Seoul, the follow-up calls, the instructions about timing and position and exit. She described the financial arrangements in enough detail that 3 of the people she named had retained criminal attorneys before the recording finished. She described the recruitment, how they had found her obsession, how they had reframed it, how they had handed her infrastructure she didn't build and confidence she hadn't earned. and aimed her like something with a barrel and a sight. She was calm throughout, not the hollow calm of someone detached from their own actions. The specific, settled calm of a person who has used up every other available option and has arrived at truth not because they believe in it, but because it is the only thing left with any weight. Near the end, the journalist asked about initial contact, not the coalition before the coalition, who had reached her first. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said it wasn't someone from outside. She said it was a woman who came to her directly, who had things that no outside operative could have had: the internal schedule, the security patterns, the specific movements inside the Lee household on event nights. A woman who said she only wanted Tiffany gone, that it was better for everyone, that Seo-jun would understand eventually, that he would return to what he was supposed to be when the thing pulling him sideways was removed. The journalist asked for the name. Vanessa gave it. The recording ended. The story published 48 hours later. It moved with the specific velocity of something that had institutional weight behind it, not viral, not tabloid, but absorbed rapidly by the right rooms, the right people, the right channels. The name Vanessa had given was a name that people inside the Lee world recognized immediately. She had been close to Seo-jun for years, not as staff, as someone considered a fixture, a person who had earned her access through time and presence and the appearance of loyalty. She had been at the private dinners. She had been in the house. She had known the texture of that life from the inside because she had spent years making herself a part of it. She had watched Seo-jun fall for Tiffany and had told herself it was temporary, that a man like him would eventually reorient, come back to his own orbit. She had given that belief years. She had been patient with it, tended it, kept it alive in the private architecture of herself where no one could examine it. When Tiffany became permanent, when it became undeniable that Tiffany Sinclair had not simply entered this world but had reshaped it around herself, had made herself structural to it, had made herself structural to him, something in this woman made a final decision. She found Vanessa. She made the introduction to the coalition. She fed the intelligence across 3 months in carefully calibrated pieces. And then she had brought flowers to the hospital, had held Seo-jun's hand in the corridor, had asked Tiffany how her recovery was progressing with an expression of perfect warmth. The performance had never slipped, not once. It was the most disciplined thing anyone in that household had ever done. It was also what had given her away. Tiffany had known for 17 days before the confession published. She had identified the behavioral signature through memory alone, 14 interactions across 8 months, a micro pattern in the specific quality of this woman's presence during moments of physical proximity between Tiffany and Seo-jun. Not jealousy. Jealousy has heat to it, an involuntary warmth that registers even when suppressed. This was colder, the deliberate absence of a response that should have been there, the face holding neutral in a way that required effort, and the effort being almost invisible. Tiffany had logged it the first time she noticed, had said nothing because there was nothing to say yet, had continued accumulating the financial traces, the communication architecture, the intelligence timeline, until she had something that could survive legal scrutiny from every angle. During those 17 days, she had dinner with this woman twice. She had asked about her sister's new apartment. She had thanked her, once genuinely sounding, for coming to the hospital in the early days. She had given away nothing, not a fraction. When the name from Vanessa's confession reached Seo-jun through his chief of staff, he came directly to Tiffany's office, stood in the doorway with the document in his hand, and looked at her across the room. She looked up from her desk. "I know," she said. 17 days. He came in, closed the door, sat across from her, not beside her, across the way they had always discussed hard things. Equal footing, full attention from both sides. She walked him through it from the beginning, the behavioral tell, when she'd first noticed it, why she'd held it, how the case had been built in the weeks since, what was already in her attorney's hands, what was ready to move the moment they decided to move it. When she finished, Seo-jun sat with it for a long moment. "You were protecting the evidence," he said. I was protecting us, she said. There's a difference. He held her gaze. Understanding moved across his face, not just of the situation, but of her. Of the specific thing it had cost her to sit across from this woman at dinner twice and perform normalcy while carrying what she was carrying. I need to be in the room, he said. I know, she said. I planned for that. The meeting was arranged through an ordinary channel, an invitation to the Lee residence, framed as an informal dinner, nothing about the wording to produce alarm in someone who still believed she had not been found. She arrived at 7, was shown through the entrance, past the main hallway, to the private study in the east wing. She came in expecting a table set for 3. She found Tiffany alone, already seated, in a room with no dinner. The door closed. She stood for a moment. Read the room the way people read rooms when something has shifted and they haven't yet identified the shift. Her face produced something a fraction of a second where the performance adjusted, recalibrating, and then settled back into warmth and mild confusion. Tiffany set a file on the table. She said nothing yet. She let it speak first. The woman sat, opened it. Her eyes moved across the pages with the controlled speed of someone reading toward information they were hoping would not be there and finding it anyway on every page, thorough and sourced and arranged without a single gap. Financial records, communication logs, the intelligence timeline, Vanessa's full recorded statement. The complete case, assembled, legally formatted. She closed the file, put both hands flat on the table, looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked back. Same posture she had in every room she ever occupied, present, grounded, generating the specific quality of quiet that was more aggressive than noise, because it was completely chosen. She let the silence run, let it become deliberate, let the woman across from her understand that every second of it was intentional. Then she spoke. I want you to understand something, Tiffany said. I was never afraid of you. I was never threatened by you. You read everything wrong about me, about him, about what we are, and you tried to take something apart that was never yours to touch. She paused, did not look away. Now you're going to sit there and listen to exactly what happens next. She laid it out, no emotion in the delivery. Just facts, the legal proceedings already in motion, the financial consequences already structured, the specific and permanent removal of this woman from every layer of the Lee world, access, presence, association, history, all of it, every detail accounted for, every consequence real and already moving. The woman across the table had nothing to offer. The file had already answered everything. When Tiffany finished, she stood, smoothed her jacket, moved to the door and opened it. Seo-jun was in the adjacent room. He had heard everything through the panel. He stepped through the doorway and looked at the woman, this person who had eaten at his table for years, who had stood in that hospital corridor and held his hand while his wife was in surgery 30 feet away, and his face did nothing. That was the thing. It simply did nothing. Not controlled fury, not cold performance, nothing. The specific blankness of a man who has issued a final internal verdict and has no interest in narrating it. He opened the exterior door. 2 members of the legal team and a security representative were standing in the hallway. The woman stood. She looked at Seo-jun one more time, something in her face that was the last remnant of whatever she had carried for years, surfacing once, briefly, before it had nowhere left to go. He did not look back. He had already turned toward the interior of the room, toward Tiffany, because that was where his attention lived, and had always lived, and this was not going to be the moment that changed it. She was escorted out, the door closed. Seo-jun crossed the room. He took Tiffany's face in both hands deliberately, without hurry, with the specific weight of a man who had thought about this moment for 9 days in a hospital corridor and was not going to be careless with it now. He pressed his forehead to hers, held it there. She put one hand over both of his. I told you I'd be fine, she said. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The 9 days were in his hands. She could feel them. Outside, Seoul continued. Traffic, light, the city's permanent, indifferent hum. They stood in the quiet of that room for a long time. What came after was not a triumph in the theatrical sense. No announcement, no public reckoning designed for an audience. The rival coalition collapsed over the following quarter through the compounding pressure of regulatory exposure, investor withdrawal, and active legal proceedings in 3 jurisdictions simultaneously. Their acquisition window closed permanently. Several executives faced criminal charges. Others resigned before the charges reached them. The organizations restructured into forms that no longer had the capital or the reach to aim at anything the size of what the Lees had built. The family members who had communicated with the coalition remained exactly where they were: their titles, their invitations, their access to the ceremonial surface of the empire. Nothing beneath it. They understood this. They did not challenge it. The understanding was its own sentence, quiet and indefinite. The woman from inside the house faced the full legal weight of the case Tiffany had built across those weeks. Her name was removed from every record associated with the Lee household. She was not discussed in that home, again, not with bitterness, not with anger, simply not. The way you stop discussing a room you've sealed. Vanessa Cole's full confession became part of an active legal record. Her assets remained frozen pending ongoing proceedings. She did not return to public life, not dramatically, not in the way of someone who made a visible exit. She simply was no longer present. The specific disappearance of someone who spent all their currency and has nothing left to exchange. She had wanted, more than anything else, to matter to Tiffany Sinclair, to register, to be seen by her as a real threat, a real rival, a real presence. That was the final consequence. She didn't. In the spring, Tiffany took a formal executive seat on the Lee Foundation board, not symbolic. Full decision-making authority over a division she designed herself from the restructured assets of 3 former rivals. She used resources from 2 directions: the Lee Empire and the private network connected to her Somali lineage. A network that had been watching her move through the world for years and had decided, in the months following the shooting and everything that followed it, that she was exactly who they had believed she was, that she was ready. She was in contact with them weekly. The work was quiet and its reach was significant, and it was, in every sense, simply an extension of who she had always been, the woman in the room that the room underestimated, doing the thing they had decided she couldn't, and declining to explain herself when it was done. She and Seo-jun were photographed once, leaving a private dinner in Tokyo 6 months after the gala. She was in something dark and structured. His hand was at the small of her back, same hand, same place, same unhurried deliberateness as any other night in 4 years. They were not looking at the camera. They were in the middle of a conversation, something that had made her almost smile, that specific jaw shift, the fighting it expression, and he was watching it happen with the same quality of attention he had always given her and always would. The photographer got 1 frame before the motorcade moved. It was enough. They came through it as the same people who went in, not unchanged, not unmarked, but fundamentally in every way that counted the same. Their alignment intact, their trust intact. The thing that had made them a target in the first place, the love that looked like a weakness from the outside because it was so total and so specific, still there, still operating, still the most important fact in both of their lives. The people who had aimed at them had understood the love as a liability, a pressure point, a crack in the architecture. They had never understood that for 2 people built the way Tiffany Sinclair and Lee Seo-jun were built, love was not the soft part. It was the infrastructure. Everything else rested on top of it, and everything else could fall. I need you to tell me everything you've got in the comments. What hit you hardest, what you'll carry, what you would have done differently. Like and subscribe. Thank you.